All right, what a great way to kick off the Equity Summit. And now we're going to keep the conversation on housing and zoning going with our fantastic panel led by SGA's Toccarra Nicole Thomas. We are talking community-led zoning reform, changing hearts, minds, and policies.
I would like to introduce my panel. We have Moses West of the Moses West Foundation. Mr. West believes that clean water is a human right. We have Krishana Perry, who is a community cultural consultant, who believes that we all are community gatekeepers and we all have a voice. We have Chris Carr, who believes in the power of land ownership and that everybody needs land and everybody should have a right to own land if they believe so. And then we have Sonia Tross, who is the head of YIMBY Law, and she believes that housing is a right as well. Join me in welcoming my panel. So everybody, Jerusalem really set us up for a good segue towards the end of her conversation, talking about some of those regulations that need to be changed and how the current public participation process is set up in a way that we can only hear one voice. I want us to kind of walk together and imagine what kinds of art could be used to convince people to come to their local planning meeting when planning is typically a dry, wonky topic? Or how do we get more people to come to these housing discussions and discretionary review meetings where it can get a little spicy and we can kind of calm down some of that spiciness? And I'll start with you first, Sonia.
Me? Oh, okay. Well, I mean, so first of all, I think I want everybody to be on the same page of really expanding what is your idea of art, right? Because one of the things like Parks and Recreation actually is a show about how funny and great it is to be involved in local government. And a lot of the people I know that are involved in local government love that show. I found it validating. I don't know if it was literally an on-ramp for anybody, but it's, it does kind of reinforce this sense. The first time I went to a planning commission hearing, I was like, oh, I love this. This is like the longest, most boring play you could possibly go to. But that kind of, subterranean drama, such intense things are happening, it just takes a long time, And then another kind of art, I think this counts as art, and now that Twitter kind of doesn't exist anymore is a real shame, but we got so many people involved, and still to this day, with the Twitter thread. Live tweeting what's happening. People were gripped. They really wanted to know what the next thing was. And that's writing, that's also a kind of art.
Chris?
That's tough. In all honesty, how do you involve art when artists can't afford to live in most of the places where you'd want to see the involvement or the application of art? Has there been trust built in the communities that once art is utilized to push an agenda, generate sales, that the artists will still be remembered? Or is the art sanitized in order to be associated with these organizations and then thus lose its authenticity or its meaning or purpose, and you end up with a simulacrum instead of something that's real and people can tell? I also may be one of those people that thinks it's all art and design and creativity, that the way the room is designed, the way the lighting works, the smells, the sights, is it alluring, is it welcoming? Are we creating an environment that's full of hospitality? Are the people there welcoming of each other? Or is it inherently contentious? And do I want more contention in my life? Do I want more drama in my life? Do I feel like no matter how attractive it is, that I actually have a say or influence? And so a part of me thinks there has to be a way, but another part of me thinks maybe we need to do more to build community before asking each other to go to meetings or before we ask each other to do things. Are we saying hello to each other when we walk down the street? Are we engaged in community activities before we need to do a trash pickup, of hanging out with each other and just kicking it? Like that notion of do we kick it seems to have been erased or something. And so I think you ask a very good question.
Krishana?
Yeah, thank you. Hey, y'all. So one thing I think is that a lot of people, regular folks who either are showing up or not showing up to community spaces or community meetings or what have you, I think a lot of people actually don't know how zoning affects them on a daily basis. And I think that art actually could help bridge that gap and kind of show what, how this zoning issue is affecting your community. So I'm reminded of a really cool project in St. Paul, in the Rondo community, and they are, working to reconnect their community, as a lot of folks are in this time. And they actually, as part of their plans, they have massive amount of plans in different spaces, but one of them was a commemorative art plaza. And that commemorative art plaza created a community space, and it also timelined and documented the issues and what was going on in the communities, what was lost. They have the data. All of that is actually displayed on the pieces of art in this plaza. And I think that is very powerful for zoning and for this movement, because folks don't understand exactly what that is. So they put this art plaza in a place that had actually lost a business or a home to the highway being built. And so they put their feet in the ground and said, we're not going anywhere. This is where we were. This is where we still are. And here's our story. And I think that art can play that role very well, because I think that art speaks when there is no voice to be heard. And so you see that, and you can see whose voice is still here, and what the community still cares about. And I think that's important for this movement.
I want you to say that again. Oh, you said art does what?
Yeah, art speaks when there is no voice. So what you see in a community is what is still there, and that's the investment. Either that could be part of the investment. Hopefully, it's just a part and not the only thing. But it does signal what the priorities are and what the voices are and who the people are, and hopefully, it's done in the right way. And we can talk about that.
Moses?
Yes, thank you. Very good question. Over my life, I think I've seen art used to bring people together. And art is not just something that we paint or draw or look at, but art is also something that we listen to. And the vibration of the universe, that as I see it and feel it, because if you've seen a picture of me, I always have on headphones. If I'm not talking through those headphones, I'm listening to music, because music moves me. We were doing something the other day, and I had to get back to a church service over at Fort Myers. There's an organ that was broken for 30 years, and they repaired this organ. And I got to meet the organ conductor, so I had to rush from my projects I was doing here to get there to hear this organ play, and it brought me to tears. He came back up and he played We Shall Overcome for me by myself in this church that was built in 1923 with a 100-year-old organ that has just been redone. So in the community, to bring people together, I just have to go back on what I've seen over my life. The first time I saw Muddy Waters I was very young. I never had any idea who he was, but it was at the Carver Center in San Antonio, Texas, and it brought the entire community together. It brought white people together. It brought black people together. It brought everybody together. At my home in Chicago, I have a few blues musicians come by the house. Billy Branch, he's a harmonica player. Have a party on my birthday every year. Every neighbor comes out. People from a block away, when we were amped up, they hear it, they come out. And we have discussions once everybody gets together over this music. More musicians come out and play, and this music brings us together. So I say in a community, you want to bring people together, music is universal. It's a vibration of the universe. Bring music. Find your old musicians. Bring them out.
So we're imagining this new world, right? We're talking about music, we're talking about the written word, we're talking about the details and the architecture, the third spaces, the community spaces. I want to drill down on that a little bit. And also, by the way, Moses, if I don't get an invite to that music festival next year,
everybody's like, they want to come.
We're all invited, right? So why haven't we seen art applied to zoning reform? We've seen art in almost every single social movement. I'm thinking about the Black Lives mural that, rest in peace, it was just ripped out. We are nonpartisan, by the way. The AIDS memorial quilt, which was on the mall and which was endemic in getting the word out to the world. Marvin Gaye's song, What's Going On. So we see art coming out of the community, coming out of people. We see it as part to maintain momentum. Why has this not been applied to zoning reform? And any of you all can jump in here. Chris?
I am definitely in the boat of art is important. I've been a full-time artist and musician my entire adult life. Last full-time job I had was like in 2004, something like that. And being an artist, I then feel a way when I hear people say how transformative it is and how many of my friends are homeless. How many of my friends have been homeless? How many of my friends have not gotten the mental health care they need because they want to save the world? And companies and agendas and people using their lives is different. And everything that's been said is correct in that, like, when you get together in a room full of people, that connectivity, that synergy has made me change my life. And I've been heavily affected by zoning laws when it comes to who can gather, when, where, how you can own your space, what you can do with your space. We'll get into that a little bit later. But I have a feeling of like, the reason why it hasn't been included is that real? Like, do musicians understand how zoning affects them? Are they building owners? Are they ever in a situation where their real life practice aligns with the real life practice of the people in these fields? Like, do the musicians hang out with the lawyers that understand the zoning? When musicians go into offices, do they get dismissed and looked at like, well, you're a drug addict? And they do less drugs than the person working at that office? They're just hippies and don't take showers, you know? So like...
I want to jump in here though, Chris, because I want to drill down on this. When we were talking about this panel and putting it together, a story came out about how you learned about zoning as a rapper. Walk us through that story, please.
Yeah, I mean, growing up in DC, you want to throw a show, it's in a venue. It has to be a legitimate venue or the cops will shut you down, they'll take everyone's ID and someone's probably going to jail. My friends in New York, I had access to this loft building. That loft building was made available due to zoning changes. I didn't understand it at the time, but in Dumbo and in East Williamsburg, after September 11th, they did a lot of conversions from old warehouses and industrial use into mixed use or residential. At that point, all these artists started taking over the spaces and they would do the renovations themselves. And for whatever reason, the building department didn't come in and stop us. The police knew what was going on, but you'd have artists that would live 8 people in a 3-bedroom apartment, lofted bedroom. Most of y'all wouldn't want to do it, or maybe you did. Maybe I've seen y'all at the party. But if you wanted to move to New York and only pay $300 a month rent, you could. If you wanted to throw parties in your house, you could. Well, at a certain point, you throw enough illegal parties in your house, you're like, that's not sustainable. You'd be 40 years old. You try to work with venues. You go to venues, and they're like, we don't like what you talk about. We don't like your friends. We don't like how they dress. Your friend has purple hair, and they dress a different gender than I should expect them to. And so you realize we need to get our own space. So then you talk to a club owner, and they're like, look at the tax map. This is how zoning works. The venues can only operate in this area of the city. They can only be open at this time. They can only do these type of businesses. If you do this type of business more than 50% of your income, then you have to pay this. You have to get a special permit. And I'm like, what? I thought when you have a space, you do what you want. No. So we go through running an art space for 10 years. You realize, well, when you're renting from people or you're running a space, you need to buy. We started looking into buying. Well, you still can't do what you want. We started looking upstate. Well, we'll do a campground and tiny houses. You can't do tiny houses in Maryland or New York. They're minimum requirements.
What's a tiny house?
You know? And all these people trying to sell us plans on you can do whatever you want. And you learn like you cannot do what you want. And I got hit very clearly with zoning. So now I'd be able to write something real. Like now I'd be able to write a piece on zoning and how municipalities were involved in the history of segregation and restrictive covenants. And I'd know about zoning. But as an artist for 15, 18 years, that wasn't real. I was stuck at how do we meet each other and hang out and find connectivity? So I think there is an opportunity, and I totally agree with what both you all have said, of the potential for it. But I think it will take a lot of work of building trust and finding a real alignment so that artists, when people make fake songs about politics, you can tell it's fake. When people make songs because someone paid them, Busta Rhymes did a song for Geico or something, or like something during Christmas, it was horrible, and he's one of the best rappers ever. And so I think alignment's important if you're gonna do it.
I want to go to Sonia next. I think you have a response to this one. So answer that question first, but then while you're answering, I want you to think about it. You are the head of YIMBY Law, based in California. You all have had some really great successes. The one thing that really stood out to me is the housing element dashboard, where you're tracking how housing elements that are adopted produce units for housing supply. Is there any space for art in there?
Yes. Okay, so one thing is, thinking about outcomes, I actually do think there's a lot there's so much that the arts do to advance our mission. The first thing that I was thinking about really was Sesame Street, right? I think lots of us grew up watching it. I don't know if kids today really watch it. But Sesame Street was set in the kind of community that people who are here are trying to create. And so we might not initially recognize this as, like art that's about zoning, but it really is. New York itself, like what city is more videoed and depicted in art, than New York, right? We're surrounded by stories of places where your friends live nearby. You can walk there, even though for a lot of Americans that's not their reality, but it's aspirational. It's what people want. Corduroy, actually, for me, when I was a kid, you got to look for it a little bit. But the little girl in Corduroy was able to walk to the store herself, which made a big impression on me as a kid. And then she ran to her apartment. It says she lives in an apartment. So it is there. But as far as, and I actually really do take seriously, though, because on the one hand, I'm disputing your question, but on the other hand, I know exactly what you mean. And I can tell you, so there's a couple of things. In the zoning reform world, it's quite new to have organizations, like YIMBY. I mean, we're 10 years old, but that's still relatively new. And there's lots of organizations out there that are just municipally based, because YIMBY is national. We have 67 chapters in 25 states. And our chapters are grassroots community organizations, regular people who show up to say yes, even though all that stuff that Jerusalem said is true, that the system is not so friendly for people to show up to say yes. We train them and we encourage them and all of these kinds of things. So there is the kind of art that you would expect from grassroots community stuff coming out of our chapters. People design their own logos, they want to make their own posters, and they make their own t-shirts. And it is starting. I have to say that we have, I think, maybe made some mistakes, because we also, especially when we were like a younger organization, were very sort of stressed about wanting to be taken seriously. When I first started, I had no stress about that. 3 or 4 years in, when you're at your most, when you believe you're a fraud, you know what I mean? It's like
Imposter syndrome.
Exactly.
And the imposters never have
right.
the syndrome, by the way.
Because it's like big enough to be a thing, but you're not a thing yet. Then we really wanted to look more legitimate. And so there was this strong, we wanted to look more corporate. That's art too, but it's not what we're talking about, right? We looked like a toothpaste brand, and that's because we wanted to have the broadest possible appeal. We wanted people to think that we were a real thing and not just like 3 or 4 people who don't know what they're doing. So that's all I can offer about how that happened, but there is some of that out there. But for the art, for what we're doing with our organizers in California, I think it's kind of actually what I said and what other people have already touched on, which is that the art it brings people together, but it also comes out of community, because really good, interesting art comes out of people who kind of know each other, who start to have symbolism, who start to have inside jokes. That's when you have something where there's like a real there, that there's like a human mind and on the one hand, it's specific, and it's really meaningful when it's more specific, and it reflects iconography from your city. But on the other hand, this is a little bit where we were fleeing from, then being specific, are you turning off other people? Are people looking at that and being like, oh, this isn't for me because I don't understand this style, I don't know why this is like that,
I think that's where all the different forms come in, right?
Yeah.
We can bring everybody in under the tent. Let's come on the other side of the country now. So, Krishana, I want to come to you. You bill yourself as a cultural consultant. Tell us about that time when you were in Hilton Head, when you were hired to be a community planner, but you found your voice as a cultural consultant. Tell us about that. What was that, and how did that relate to zoning reform?
Absolutely. I like to say that, well, I didn't say it. Somebody told me this, you're doing this, you're a culture keeper. You're a keeper of the culture. And I was like, yeah, Yeah, I am. So there were all these things that had been building up to me being able to take on a role like that. And so let's just kind of set the stage here. So I've worked in community engagement. I've worked in workforce development. I'm doing community development type of work, just kind of working through my career here. And then was able to work on some really pertinent policy at the federal level. And then I was like, I want to do this with my hands. So I left. And I went to a local community that I was living in, which was Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. As we were talking about earlier, it was a red state, it was a red county, it was a red town. And but
red?
it was everything but yes. So we were there, and there's all this years and years of work and of the community who had lived there, making their voices heard, asking for what they want, getting the resources, getting the projects and the recommendation reports and those sorts of things. So I'm walking into a space that has done a lot of the groundwork, but still didn't quite understand from the government side how to honor those, like the equitable outcomes that the community was looking for. So they had gotten this report together and they were doing a good job implementing it, but they didn't quite understand how to communicate with the community what had been done, why it had been done a certain way, what still remained to be done, and how the community could still have access and a voice in the additional implementation that needed to be made. So they thought they were hiring for a principal planner over cultural and historic preservation. What they got was someone with years of activism, social justice, equity policy, social programming, someone who just loves the culture and thinks that it needs to be preserved. And I came in there and realized very quickly that they needed someone who knew how to communicate what the issues were, and what work had been done and what had not been done, and then someone who just knows how to build trust. So it was really what I like to call reconciliation planning. We were trying to repair a relationship while instituting district planning, instituting zoning reform, and trying to create a new comprehensive plan. But a lot of those efforts were being thwarted because there was no relationship. There was the trust was not there. So I took it upon myself to make sure that I could help repair the trust between the local government and the community. So I was in a liaison role, and that's kind of how that came about. And what I mean by reconciliation planning is that recognizing that there have been harms that have been caused to a community by the actual zoning ordinances, the code, and figuring out how to address those in such a way that gets at the outcomes that the community has been asking for. So it was bridging those things. And so I came into the community, learned, all about the cultural practices, built relationships, and this was, got to talk about being authentic with these things as well, and so there's a whole thing about that, and being able to do that and figuring out how to bring the community's voice to the table when it's not just a community meeting. It's not just we're going to go set up shop in this park and grab these nuggets. It was, how do you have a liaison built in who's always at the table and always has the community's pulse and their exact thing, their exact items they're asking for as you're looking at, okay, we're applying this, these setbacks and these buffers or whatever, we're applying these things to this project. And is this the type of thing that the community is pushing back against? Is this a thing that's like stopping their projects from being done? There's a lot of that. And so there's a lot to unpack there, but I think that my perspective is from the institutional, kind of like the inside. I prefer to work inside the government because I think that there are ways to influence the way that people think and the way that policies are written. Don't tell anybody, I'm on camera. But that's my goal. And so, we can talk more about that and follow-up questions, what have you.
Thank you for that. I actually have a question for both you and Sonia. You just walked us through your experience as the planner for this community who became a cultural liaison. Sonia, you lead a national movement, right? How do we scale this up? Part of this panel, part of the whole Equity Summit is those actionable items, insights that we can take back home. This tends to be, this process, a charismatic person who basically builds the zoning reform on their back, right? How do we scale this? How do we make this that this becomes the standard?
Can I hop in here?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I think I'm so happy to hear that there are like council members and active government employees in here, because I think that that is where, for me, my perspective, right, is from that government institutional side. But I think it's the hiring and really crafting your roles to reach towards the outcomes that you're looking for. So we're not just hiring another planner. We're not just hiring another manager because we need to fill a role. We are cultivating the type of people that we want on our teams that are thinking in the ways that we are interested in. We're hiring people that have, what is the actual need? So yeah, you need a planner, but you also need somebody who knows how to repair this relationship so that you can stop being met with opposition every step of the way. So from my perspective, it is understanding what you are looking to get out of and actually designing it in that way. So, and that takes leadership. It takes, being able to take advantage of a window of opportunity in the government, and saying, but that takes a lot of advocacy. It takes a lot of years of like beating down people's doors and saying, we need somebody inside, your office that can be in the community on a daily basis, and that's a part of their job. It's not, oh, I have to take this extra step to go outside of the community and I'm not gonna get paid because I'm not on the clock. No, that needs to be baked into their role. And understanding the interdisciplinary nature of this reconciliation planning that I'm talking about. You're not always going to have someone who has the exact planning, technical experience. I didn't. I brought in, like I said, I've got facilitation skills. I've got, I've led dialogues on intergroup dialogue on race. There are all these various things that made for the type of person they were looking for to get to the outcomes they wanted. So I think more organizations, more government entities for sure need to be intentional about who they're hiring. And that's one of those ways that you can see where the investment really lies. Are they just throwing up art for the sake of art and saying, oh, we're helping the community? Or are they saying, I'm willing to pay somebody $90,000 to be in this community, to do this work, and to get the outcomes that we want? That's my scaling up.
Sonia?
I really like what you said, and I almost want you to say it again, that, I know
I can't repeat what I was saying.
that a lot of this stuff happens on the backs of a charismatic leader. And we have to highlight this. Sometimes at these things, you're like, oh, I went there all day, everybody agreed with each other. This is actually a point of a little bit of disagreement. We can have it all, but like when, like Jerusalem talks, or a lot of times in our communities, the focus is like, what is the best state policy, right? What is the right policy to craft? We're gonna pay policy researchers. We're gonna pay think tanks. We're gonna spend a lot of money doing research potentially, and we're gonna craft the perfect policy. And then you're gonna pay lobbyists, and then maybe it'll get into law, and now what? So it sounds unscalable. When we talk to funders or we talk to anyone and we say that what our group does is we find those charismatic leaders, they're everywhere. And what they need is support, encouragement, they need validation. A lot of people are out there and they're saying like, this doesn't make sense to me, but I probably don't know what I'm talking about. They need you, they need us, our group to say, no, you do know what you're talking. You can trust your judgment. You are absolutely right about this. You should be able to build an apartment building there, And you might encounter somebody who's been some grizzled person in government for a long time who tries to put you off of it and say, oh, it's politically impossible, or you don't know anything, Okay, anyway, sorry, I'm on a tangent. But the point is that, we have to find those charismatic leaders, we have to support them. And a lot of times people think that sounds unscalable because they're just like, oh, that's so expensive. Well, it's honestly not that expensive, because the thing about passionate people is they have a passion, they want to do it. Sometimes you get to hire them, sometimes you don't need to. And when we compare it to what philanthropy is already spending money on, it's really not expensive, because that money is out there. I mean, how much money does a think tank cost? I mean, they have dozens and dozens of employees. I don't have to tell you guys, I'm sorry. But imagine if those employees were community organizers, right? We wouldn't need all that think tank stuff.
Well, one thing that came out in both of you all's response, or at least it's resonating for me, we have plenty of money for the lobbyists, we have plenty of money for the planners, we have plenty of money for the process. Where's the money for the art? When you do see art, it tends to be thrown up after the development is done. And it's like, oh, we'll do a design competition to find an artist to put together this art piece. Art should have been there the whole way through. And so now I'm going to come over to you, Moses. We heard about how do you scale it up, follow the money. Implicitly, we talked about that. We heard about people need to know about these regulations that essentially dictate our entire life. I want to talk through some of the experiences that you've gone. Tell us about the Moses West Foundation. What do you do? And then I want to hear about the time where you ran into zoning regulations in Texas. I believe it was Spring Hill, Texas, when you were trying to bring one of your generators.
Sand Branch.
Thank you.
Okay. Hey, part of a little bit of an answer to what y'all are saying here. I've lived a large portion of my life outside of the United States. And there's a thing about living in Europe, not so much Australia, but over in Europe. There's art everywhere. There's art on the outside of my building. There's art in every building that's there. We go to the park, we listen to the symphony in the summer, and you look at every building, and every building is resonating the symphony because of the art that was built into the structure of the building. They don't tear their buildings down. They last a lot longer than ours do. They have statues out front. You walk everywhere, and especially in Paris. It's just, you're walking in art. And if we could learn some of that from the way they do things in Europe. My company, what I do is, I have a company, AWG Contracting, whereas I build machines for the military. I build these large water generators that produce water out of the air. And then when the military sends these machines back to me, or if I design something for them that's sitting on a base, and then someone needs water somewhere, I'll pull that machine off the base and I'll go and I'll help a community. And so I've taken a machine to Puerto Rico, Flint, and to Sand Branch. I'll never go back to Sand Branch. I'll say that on camera. Never, okay? And so that was like a combat tour. And so so let me
make sure I'm understanding. You were bringing one of your AWGs
yes.
that pulls water out of the air to Sand Branch.
Yes.
And this experience has soured you. You won't ever go back.
Oh, yes.
I'm presuming zoning had something to do with this, right?
Oh, absolutely. The zoning in that area there, they have put this community, they have surrounded this community and their land by sewage treatment plants. Many minority communities in the United States are put in some of the most god-awful places. They're put on toxic land next to super fun sites. And the air and the water quality is just absolutely horrible. That place, it was incredible. There was lots of humidity in the air, but it was the humidity from the sewage treatment plants and the evaporation of the water. Yes.
And so you ran into zoning. What happened? I believe you had to get a permit to become a water treatment facility?
No, that in the very beginning when I first started the process of pulling water out of the air, there was no regulation for it. There was no zoning for it. So when I was in Texas and coming up with this technology and trying to get it approved by the federal government, the United States military, and the state of Texas, which is running out of water, and I came to them, I told them, I said, you're not running out of water. You've got water everywhere. Just ask anybody who's gone and gotten their hair fixed lately and come outside, they can tell you what the humidity reading is for today. Okay?
Can confirm.
There you go. So there's water in the air. I think they tried to placate me a little bit, and I said, okay, we're going to approve this little project. We're going to see if you can do it. And the regulation wasn't there. So I was very fortunate is where I actually got to make the regulation for pulling water out of the air for the state of Texas, because I don't think they thought it was going to be able to be done. They were just like, sure, come back to us when you're done. And then also with the technology on zoning, they had to figure out how you were going to classify this water. So they decided to classify the water from the atmospheric water generator in the state of Texas for zoning issues as groundwater. And I said, that's great. because I know that you guys pull water out of the ground at 0.12 kilowatts per liter. I'm making it at 0.08. So I have y'all beat. So basically, this machine now, it got approved in the state of Texas, so you can actually zone your home. You don't have, this is kind of incredible. I couldn't believe that this happened. I was sitting here in real time watching it happen. They said, okay, what we're going to do is you're going to sit this machine at someone's house. You're going to call up the Texas Commission of Environmental Quality for zoning, and you're going to produce water at this house. You got to produce so much. It's got to pull this amount of energy. We're going to test it 3 times in 90 days. And after the third water quality test, this house is going to be its own public water system. Okay, so this house now can sell water to the next door neighbor by pulling it out of the air. And that is the rule that was made for my company. And I can't believe they did that. But they had never seen this before, so that's how I got away with it.
Okay, so not you creating community for water. How does that play into climate change?
Oh my God, climate change right now, I can't hold back. I'm way too old to hold back now, and I've seen too much. I'm not going to. We had a conversation about this in the hallway. Okay, you got to get some old people working for you. No, so right now we're at a place, we're in system collapse. I know environmental scientists that are on vacation and they're not coming back to work. I know people in Australia who work in environmental sciences and they've just quit. Wow. Europe as well. So the place we're at right now, we're at ecosystem collapse. We have species dying every day, and everybody tends to forget we're a species. We're a species. We've killed the lungs of the planet, which is the Amazon. And some of the problems that we see politically today are all because our planet is not a healthy place. Our planet's not healthy. Guess what, folks? We're not healthy. Our neighborhoods aren't healthy. Our children aren't healthy. Our minds aren't healthy because we're actually destroying the energy of this place that we live on. So with this technology and climate change, this is that thing where I have communities that I've worked with, like Flint, Michigan. It doesn't matter what kind of zoning you had in Flint. And I've got 3 years of combat, and I tell you, I collapsed and I cried like a baby. After about 5 days, I was talking to Dr. Shepard on the phone because I saw cognitively impaired children that I would have 30 children around the water generator, and I was supplying an entire neighborhood with all of their drinking water. I got to say, the big machines that I make, they can make up to 2,200 liters of water a day. That's 1,200, 2,500 gallons, 2,000 gallons a day. 1,250 gallons of pure water just normally. The kids were cognitively impaired. They've zoned these people out of existence. And then I saw something also on the neighborhood zoning there. On the 4th ward where I was, say if it's a big circle, but there was a line that there was a road that came through there, and there was a neighborhood in there, and they had pure water in there. They had clean water. It was a part of the place that had been gentrified, but everybody around that still had contaminated lead in their water. And as soon as this place changes, the water became pure here as it continued to move around as everybody was moved out. What was going on? I won't speculate. I'll let everybody make their own minds up on that.
Thank you for that. I want to take us in a little bit of a different direction. Earlier during his opening remarks, Calvin said, we have to speak truth to power. I'm paraphrasing. And art is one of those things that speaks truth to power. And I want to give you all in a moment to opine, why has art been stripped out of our everyday lives? And why is it not directly injected into zoning? Chris, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I have a positive take on this, that art is very alive. Every day I talk to artists. I'm on a tour right now, Parn Hash, which is my rap name, Parn Hash Nikovsky's Great American Adventure, and I'm going around the country speaking to other artists and people that do amazing work. no matter how small or how big. And I've been in Massachusetts, I've been in Florida, I've been in Texas, I'm going to California, I've been in Maine, New York, keep naming places. Everywhere I go, I meet people who are making amazing, creative designs, ideas, and working with community. Events like this, where we're all from such different backgrounds, but I see it. One of the things is affordability. Where I live in New York, people can't afford to move anymore and be artists. When I moved to New York, you could sell comedy tickets. That's like a running joke of people that move to New York who sell comedy tickets until they become actors. You make no money ever selling the comedy tickets. It's the hustle they get you with. But you can afford to stay long enough to find real work. When I think about the amount of entertainment versus creative art, and the amount of content and young people being cultured into content creation instead of what Moses is hitting on, Muddy Waters was not just content. That's culture, that's history, that's being, that's community. You're talking about symbology and the reality of how this is all a system of reference points. And if artists don't have meaning in their lives, how do they generate their meaning in their art to connect with other people? Are we being encouraged to put meaning into things? Or are we being told what's meaningful is how much money you have, the comfort you have, the things you buy? I do think, though, that the opportunity is huge. When you look at Providence, Rhode Island, when you look at Bushwick, New York, when you look at Miami, and in areas that at different points seem to be marginalized or underserved, the artists help float those communities. They helped convert the buildings. They became the designers and the builders who did some of the inside, did some of the paintings on the outside, the murals, brought the attention, brought the news cameras, brought the events, brought the activities, so that people 10 years before I lived in Bushwick were like, don't go to Bushwick, you'll get robbed. When I moved there, you could still get robbed, but it was like, it's worth the risk because the parties are so amazing, the bands are so good. And literally MGMT, Vampire Weekend, Kid Cudi, I mean, you can name, I don't know how many people, like Lil Mott, all these people were involved in community activities. You would see them in the DIY spots, you would see them at the venues. It wasn't art and community, artists were with you, you know? And so I think we're seeing less of real human connectivity. And I don't know if that's COVID, I don't know what happened, you can make art by yourself, but if you all adventure, anyone here who wants to go with me, we can go visit a goat farm where the guy who runs it paints. And while you're there, you'll meet another artist who does fire spinning and fire juggling. But right now, the way they live is advocating for people who have been affected by environmental contamination in the Gulf South. And it's through their very clear encounter with zoning, but their arts and creativity is kind of what connected them and their passion. And so I think the money it costs to live, and for venues, how expensive it is to exist in a place like New York City or DC, having a little art gallery where you let your friends come up and put on their clown gear and only 3 people come look and no one buys drinks because they're sober, that doesn't pay rent in New York. You know, like selling drinks pays rent. And having RuPaul's Drag Race on the, and I like Drag Race, so having sports, have whatever it is on the screen gets money as opposed to art and people talking about divisive issues, challenging the system. If art is supposed to be a reflection of life, that means we challenge authority. Why would authority want us to have more? But I think you can't stop the art, and that's the beauty. So I look forward to how we can ideate and learn from what happened in Providence, learn from what happened in Bushwick, learn what happened in Charlotte, North Carolina, see what's happening in next to Sarasota, Bradenton, where they changed the zoning so you could do multi-use in some of the traditional single-family houses so that you can run a business that's a store out of your house and keep your job, your family, your life, your church community near each other, and where people who don't drive can actually participate in things. So I think it's there.
Moses?
Yes, I think we have a great example of how music and art actually influence an area. When people think of Austin, Texas, they sometimes call Austin, Texas the music capital of the world. Well, when I was growing up in Texas, we'd go up to Austin. I got to meet Stevie Ray Vaughan at a bar he was playing, and there was only probably about 10 people listening to him. All the musicians that came up there, they influenced the way the strip looked. People came there just to hear that. Artists came there just to play. That area there, now we have Shaka, I think is his name, Apollo Mondesir, he can get it correct. But he's trying to zone an area in the city just for the musicians to live. But that is what gave the entire city a kind of a name. And now those artists can't keep Austin weird. And the artist kept it weird. We had a guy, Leslie, who walked around in a thong. That was weird. But the city, the artists came there and flocked in, and it brought a vibrancy to the city. And then if I think back when I was a little boy, and the place where I really wanted to go was I wanted to go to this place called Haight-Ashbury. Because all the hippies, they look so good. I said, I got to go there and hang out.
I was just in there, Moses.
I was just a little boy, though. And so, but in the Haight, there was a culture. It was the music. The people could afford to stay there, and it turned the whole culture of a state. A music district, Haight-Ashbury. You can look at every major band that played, and everybody who's playing today, who samples all the music, it came out of Motown or Haight-Ashbury. Everything that we listened to and sampled.
Well, music, art, the written word, it drives all of our culture, right? And what I'm hearing kind of in that response, when you think about a lot of great cities, they are known for their culture or their art scenes, right? But our zoning is preventing more communities from becoming from that. So now it's becoming a supply and demand issue, right? You want to go to New York, you want to get that old beat type lifestyle. You can't now, right? So I want us to kind of have our closing thoughts. We've talked about so much today. I want us to kind of distill it into one action. What's one thing you would tell a planner, if you could, or whomever? Let's all envision this together. I am the empress who controls zoning reform for the whole globe. What's one thing you need to tell me to do to make sure that this zoning reform movement sustains everybody, includes art in all we do, and allows everyone to have a home? Moses, you want to kick us off?
There has to be a place for community where people can come together and express themselves in that community and be free to express themselves. Musically, and you need to bring different types of music, not just classical, not just rock, not just hip hop. You need to bring art in the form of that music. And then that shares across different boundaries. And it gets everyone interested in different things. And it also helps just to expand the mind.
Krishana?
Yes, I would tell you, Empress, to make room for people at the table that do not have the traditional skill set, don't have the traditional training, that have, especially people that have the lived experience of being in communities that have suffered, from zoning, exclusionary zoning, whatever the situation is, lack of affordable housing, not being able to utilize their land to, for their income and for their livelihood. I would say to continue to make room for folks at the table so that their lived experiences can truly be weaved into the policies to get the outcomes that are meant to pull people out of those spaces that they have been kind of tramped down into. So that's what I would say.
Chris?
Funny enough, I was just at South by Southwest in Austin, saw so much music, and the day I got home, they released a report that they're stopping the music section.
Oh.
Yes.
They're what?
The final weekend is all music. They do interactive, which is computers, they have the educational, and now they have perfume companies and truck companies, and people have nothing to do, but they're stopping the music weekend. So, Empress, one thing I would say is please figure out mixed-use zoning and for smaller entities so that you don't have to take on a $12,000 a month rent to run a space, but to where we, as artists, where you can get 4 or 5 artists live in a space together. There are parts of the country where apparently they're still zoning against women, single women living in groups, homes together because of brothels or something like that. But there are all these things that I think could be useful, and it then comes back to remember the humans. And my statement in all these conversations, remember this is people. People are part of the government. People are part of corporations. It's not corporations and people. Like, it's all together. And so when I think of how do we have affordable space for artists to gather and make stuff together, then that gets into housing zoning and how we can live in groups. When I think of where do we display our work, well, that means we need facilities that aren't necessarily community centers for kids because there's grown adult business we need to do as artists. But to where it's not the same thing is I'm up against a corporate office building that can afford whatever the mortgage or rents are. And for cities to say the music and the art is important, that it is worth the city sometimes subsidizing and putting some money in, and getting back to the old school. Before, depending on what community you're from, the government never really helped you anyway. And you had to rely on other people in your community to step up and to put their space up, to put their time up, to put their money up. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But there will, I think, be an element of that, and hopefully those people are in government who can then say, we should stop putting up our friend's house. Why don't we use space that's empty in the city, or figure out how to use all these empty spaces that have been empty for a long time.
Thank you. And last but definitely not least, Sonia.
You said what I was going to say, but I think it's so important that I'm going to just say it again in another way, which is take a second look, legitimize something that you might have written off. Take another look at a framing, or a comment. If you're tempted to say, well, that doesn't make any sense, or that's obviously crazy, or that'll never happen, stop and look at it again, right? Or if you see something and you're like, this is a flyer made by a crazy person. Maybe it's not, right? Do what you can to try to see how it's not actually nonsense, that this is something that made sense to somebody. Reach outside of your normal frameworks. And that's what I want people to be doing.
Thank you all so much. Do not leave, because I believe we have time for a few, nope, sorry. I want to thank my panelists.